Welcome into Rob Wright's Gen X Pop Culture. And today we're talking about Band of Brothers. And we're going to talk about the first episode in the 10-part miniseries called Currahee. And with me is Heather. How are you today, Heather?
Great, Rob. Good to be here with you.
Glad you're here. And we're going to talk about this amazing series. So part
Yes.
of the reason why I'm doing this series, I wanted to go ahead and share a screen real quick with you guys. I am going on a trip this summer, and I'm going to go on the Stephen Ambrose tour. And so, what this is Steve Ambrose put together these tours based on his books, and one of them is Band of Brothers. And so, I'm actually going on this tour where I'm going to go to all the different places. So, I'm actually going on this tour
Wow.
to go to all
Very cool.
places. Yeah, it should be pretty
Very
cool. I
cool.
don't know why I'm. Hang on. Yeah, it helps if you don't have your phone on the YouTube channel that you're trying to do. Sorry about that, guys. Feedback. Anyway, so I'm going to be going to all these places. It's like a 14 day tour, and it's going to take me. We kind of start off in London, but we go to where they were stationed in England. Then we go across to Normandy. We're going to do Burkhart Manor. We're going to do the different churches, the different places around France that they have battles. We're going to go to Operation Market Garden, which was in Belgium, and then Bastogne. We're going to go see a concentration camp, and then we're also going to go to the Eagle's Nest.
Nice.
So it's pretty
Wow.
cool.
Really cool tour.
Yeah, so this is kind of how it breaks down into different days. So I get to go to all these different countries, England, France, Netherlands, Belgium, Luxembourg, France, again, Germany, and a little bit of Austria. So anyway, it's going to be kind of cool. It's going to be kind of interesting. And what I wanted to do as a precursor to it, since I'm not going till like May, but they're 10 episodes. So I wanted to do a couple a month just to talk about it and talk about the series. And that way, once we talk about the series, when I get back, I can show pictures and we can do a full review of the trip. So I thought it'd be kind of cool to share and to do. So, but
Yeah,
Steve
that's
Ambrose
great. That's
tour.
going to be so interesting.
Oh yeah, and folks, I go to StephenAmbroseTours.com. They have different types of tours. They do all kinds of World War One and World War II tours. My mom said that she used them for some of the World War One tours that she's been on, and she said they're fantastic. So, folks, they're all kinds of tours you can take through this. If you go to that website and take a look, there may even be some spaces left in the tour I'm taking if anybody wanted to go. Now, I will say it's not cheap. It's rather expensive. But then again, you're traveling and it's 14 days. The cool thing, though, is that they pay for 2 meals a day. So I'm getting my money's worth. So.
And all the travel in between the sites, right? You don't have
Oh,
to
yeah.
cover anything. There's got to be a lot of train travel in between, right? I would imagine.
Yeah, there's a lot of travel in between train and bus and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But the cool
Hotel.
thing is I only have to pay for my flight to London and then flight back from Germany, which I'm conservatively waiting and hoping airline tickets come down. I've got till May, so it's
Yeah.
January
Just
right now,
push it
so we're
up a little
recording this.
bit, right?
Yeah. So, but I mean, the good news is I live in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, so it should be too bad to get, nonstop to both. So especially in the summer when it's not snowing,
Yeah.
as of January we're recording, there's still a little bit of patchy snow on the ground from our snowstorm here. So kind of crazy. So, but anyway, let's get into Band of Brothers. So the first episode is Currahee, and let's just talk about some background of it. It's an interesting series that started in 2001. And Steven Spielberg and Tom Hanks bought the rights to this book, this is the most recent edition that I've got is Band of Brothers by Stephen Ambrose. And they decided to put it and make it into a miniseries. And at the time, of course, it was after Saving Private Ryan was just, exploded on the scene as one of the top hit movies. of 1998. So they decided to put this series together, and it actually was the most expensive series at the time, costing about 125 million, which is an average of 12.5 million per episode, which is not that much now, especially if you're an outfit like Disney who makes crap, but spends all kinds of money. Nowadays, I mean, that's nothing. But back then, and about 20 years ago, and
Yep.
if I could just get my shirt right, what am I doing here? Hang on, wardrobe malfunction. There we go. All right. But it was interesting. It was the most expensive TV show at the time, and it was amazing. Ironically, it had a rough start because it came out right around 9/11,
Mhm.
and that was very difficult for HBO to maneuver around it. But um, it ended up winning 8 Emmys. It was critically acclaimed, and just was amazing. Um, what other facts do you want to? I don't want to just hog all the time,
Oh,
Heather.
no, no problem. Well, I
That
will say I absolutely love this series. You can tell when you watch it that at the time they spent a lot of money on it because it just the look of it is incredible. All the locations, I think, which were actually mostly in England,
Mhm.
look amazing. The old planes that they use, the attention to detail that they had, where they asked a lot of the veterans, they did their research and um, just so they have an authentic look to it. The camera, the shots, the angles, the whole thing just looks incredible. It really looked at the time movie quality, which you
Mhm.
didn't always see in TV series. And I think a lot of the stuff that came out on HBO, they were really kind of at the forefront of that. TV series look just having a really quality, good look to them. This is one of those shows that when it comes on, like, if I turn on the TV and this is on and it's on the first episode, I'll, like, sit there and watch the whole thing. Even though I have the DVDs and I've seen it a ton of times, I love it. I think it's so engaging. They did an incredible job adapting, like, the real life, um, the story of these actual people and the book, and then making it into a compelling TV series, which um, can sometimes be tough to translate. Like a book,
Mhm.
and especially a true story, doesn't always translate into a good movie, but they did an incredible job making that happen. So I love it. And one other just small personal fact: my dad was actually a paratrooper. Not
Oh,
in
cool.
Yeah, not in World War II, but in the Vietnam era. He actually signed up the day he graduated high school.
Oh,
The
wow.
Vietnam War was going on. He signed up to be a paratrooper, and he actually, I mean, got lucky, didn't see combat because the paratrooper training lasts for a really long time, much longer than if
Mhm.
you just go into basic training. So by the time he got done with his training, there were no more jumps into the field planned, and so he actually never saw combat. But he actually loved being a paratrooper, and he loved skydiving, and so that's kind of an interesting connection there. So
Oh,
the
that's
whole
awesome.
idea, yeah, the idea of paratroopers always fascinated me because I would be terrified to jump out of a plane. It's not something I would ever do, but man, yeah, really, really interesting.
Yes, very interesting stuff. That's cool. Thank your dad for his service. My uncle did some low level flying, and he was in Vietnam with a couple of special forces units that he was commanding. Uh, the funny thing about that war is that you know I was so sad for some of the veterans and the way they were treated
Mhm.
afterwards. They
Yes.
shouldn't have been treated that way. I understand the protest. I understand whether we should have been there or not, but that's between people and
Right.
politicians, not people and soldiers.
Yeah, not the
Um,
soldiers who actually were there fighting.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and it's sad the way they got treated, but also, honestly, it's not like the movies. Most of the vets that have been over there that have done it won't talk about it, won't tell
Nope.
stories. And
No, they
my
don't.
uncle will tell a couple of stories at his own discretion. I never ask him anything about it. He'll volunteer it, and if he volunteers it, I'm all ears. Most of those guys don't do it. Versus World War II, completely different. Those guys in our grandparents' age used to tell all the stories and used to tell us everything about that war and how important it was for the United States to get in the war and defend the free world. So yeah, and this series really depicts some of the major heroes of that, and some of them were unsung until they
Mhm.
made this series, until these books came out and told their stories. You always think of the big ones like Patton and everybody else in the Battle of the Bulge, but nobody really delved into the paratroopers that were in there. We always talk and see shows about D-Day, but we don't see the paratroopers that went behind the lines to take out some of the guns and some of the other things that helped make the D-Day invasion possible. So this is really a unique and critically acclaimed series. Some of the
And
other information that they got from for this book, besides Band of Brothers, one of the Easy Company soldiers, David Webster, who
Mhm.
we'll talk about probably later on in the series here, was part of the parachute infantry. Well, he wrote a book, Parachute Infantry and American Paratroopers Memoir of D-Day, and it was published by the Louisiana State University Press. Well, it was basically a diary that he had, and it really kind of went unpublished or went overlooked for like 30 some odd years until Stephen Ambrose's book came out. And then when it came out, they re-released it, and you got some more detailed information directly from Webster writing in his diary during this time. So they were able to get
Interesting.
a lot of that info
I
on there.
think one of the unique things about this series is there's so many war movies and World War II movies that do talk about, like you said, Patton or some of the leaders, a lot of the battles that are actually depicted or the places, but this is so unique in that it gives you these actual people that were part of Easy Company. And you
Mhm.
get a real look at the real people and how they felt. And I know they're kind of condensing a little bit the characters and maybe giving some of the dialogue to different people, but you really get a good depiction of the men that were in this and what they experienced. I think that makes it unique too.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And at the time of filming, several of these men were still alive, which was so great because a lot of them, a lot of the people that we're talking about were actually able to talk to the actors. The actors were able to get information from
Mhm.
the actual person that lived through it, and they were able to honor their performance based upon the information they got from the actors.
Yeah.
As a matter of fact, some of the things that we'll talk about is the fact that um, they would have a scene and they'd go over the scene with the real life person and say, "Well, no, I wasn't really there. I was over here," or different traits. Like there are a couple of characters that didn't do certain things that other characters did. So, for example, one of the characters we'll talk about later on, Frank Bacani, um, he actually they have had scenes in him because smoking was more normal back then,
Mhm.
and he actually never smoked, and so he told the actor that, and they had to change the scenes, showing that he didn't ever have a cigarette in his hand because he didn't smoke. It's just
Right.
minor details that they had to really portray these men, and a lot of these guys, these actors, were lucky that the character they were portraying was still alive.
Yes.
They could talk to him. I don't know if you read up on any of that, Heather, but I found it fascinating to hear about that. And if you watch some of these programs about some of the actors and how they revered these men, it's just incredible.
Yeah, I did hear a little bit about that, and I haven't read the book. I really want to, but I did hear some of the behind the scenes information about the actors, how they actually got to know the character that they were portraying, and they kind of took it on themselves personally to make sure that the person they were portraying was happy with what they did, happy with how they were portrayed, and that it was accurate. And that definitely adds another level to it. That's really interesting.
Yeah, and the other aspect of it is that uh, some of the actors portraying certain characters where maybe their character is not still alive, or that the actual person's not still alive, or maybe they couldn't get as much information out of him. Some of his buddies would be there that knew him,
Mm,
would give them
yeah.
information too, which I found really really cool and really really fascinating because you've got these men who actually did this and lived it, and you got Hollywood actors. I mean, there's a lot of clash there. I mean, I don't know if somebody did a movie about my life, how much I would really want them to really portray. Uh, but at the same
Right.
time, these actors are portraying their buddies, their friends, themselves, and it's really cool. So, various directors were told the actors were in contact with the veterans, um, and how they did some of the direction. Um, the other good thing is that a lot of the actual men were on set or near set to give them pointers. And the cool thing I think about this series also is that a lot of these episodes begin with the actual men telling of their experience.
Yes.
And I think that's so very important to get a real perspective of this.
I love how each episode's open with the actual veterans, with the actual Easy Company men talking, kind of just giving a little bit about how they felt and their experiences that were related to that particular time frame of the episode. I think that adds so much just to see them come on because the way it's filmed, the way the story is told is so realistic. So having them come on and just set that tone in the beginning, it really added an extra um, just boost to each episode. I really love how they did that.
Yeah, and I like it. It was frustrating at times, but at the same time, I kind of liked it. They didn't tell you who they were
Yeah.
until the very end.
Yep. I
You're
like that.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
liked it. I liked it, but I just was like, oh, I think it's this person.
Right.
Oh, no,
You're
it's this
trying to
person.
guess.
You're trying to guess, and I thought that was really really cool.
And I
Um,
wasn't right on him. That's kind of disappointing. I didn't get it right because I couldn't really tell who was who. Um, it was tough.
I got one or
Mhm.
two, but
Yeah.
you're right. It was very hard to tell.
Yeah. They didn't
Um,
give it away.
the other preparation the actors went through was they went through a boot camp. So
Mhm.
Dale Dye has done all the training for all these military movies. He did it for Saving Private Ryan, several others, and he actually plays Colonel Sink in the series. And he had the actors go through a grueling 10-day boot camp where they learned all the basics on how to fire the weapons, how the men would talk, how they would march, everything. And the cool thing is that the officers weren't excluded. So all the officers had to do it too. So it was very interesting what they went through. And if you hear the actors talk about it, they told you how grueling it was. So, they'd be up at 5 a.m., rain or shine, and go to a 3 to 5 mile run, just like actual military personnel, which is really cool. And I think it really helped them to prepare for the roles.
And
Um,
to form a bond too, right?
oh yeah.
Because they're all together then going through this basic training, and it kinda helps them get the same bond that the soldiers had as they're all going through that together. Yeah, I think I read they said, like, 16-hour days and no matter what the weather was, and that's good. I think, you kinda have to do that for a movie like this is or for
Mhm.
a series like this is make them go through that. Just otherwise, it would look fake, like they didn't know what they were doing. It wouldn't look natural, right? Like, you want them
Mhm.
to have enough use of the weapons and do enough of the training to where when they're actually doing it, they look like they're not just kinda doing it for the first time.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, and they had to stay in character throughout the whole thing. There were some interesting stories. I can't remember which actors it was, but they became best friends uh, during the shoot. And the funny thing is that the characters that were playing were actually good friends. So I thought that was kind of cool, kind of ironic. And if you guys watch like on YouTube or check out any of the actors that have done this, if you look up all the Band of Brothers videos, they actually have reunions together
Oh, the
of
actors do too?
the actors. Yes,
Oh, cool.
yes,
Very cool.
which is so cool. It's interesting. So a couple of
Yeah.
the actors that I'll talk about real quick with their casting and stuff, real quick before we get to the actual characters in the story. So, David Schwimmer, who we all know from Friends, uh, plays a major role, especially in this episode. But he actually ended up on crutches, injuring his leg during the training,
Ouch.
um, which is ironic because the character that he portrays, Herbert Sobel, it's not in the show, but it's in the book, actually hurt his leg going
Wow.
through the paratrooper school. And I'll tell more about it when we
What an
show
odd
the scene.
synchronicity. I mean, that's so
Yes.
things like that are so freaky, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So Damian Lewis, who played Richard Winters, claims that when he's wanting to go into his audition, there was an actor that was in front of him in the line that looked a lot like Major Winters. And he's like, oh my gosh, this guy is going to get the part. There's no way I'm going to get this. And he was astounded that he got the part, which I thought was kind of cool. And the real Richard Winters really, gave him a pep talk and really helped him out. Um, the other interesting thing about this is one of their sayings was Currahee, and Currahee is an American Cherokee Indian word for stands together alone. And so, with this paratrooper group, and you got to think of these guys as your crack commando units. These guys were special forces before special forces
Mhm.
really became a thing. So something like a phrase like Currahee was very important to them to really help with the bonding of it, and that's kind of cool. Heather, before we show slides, do we want to talk about some of these key characters?
Yeah, I was gonna say too on the Currahee, it's really interesting that that's what that means and that phrase means, and that it's the motto of
Mhm.
the paratroopers, and that hill, like running that hill, kind of made that happen for them. It kind of forged that bond with them because even though it's brutal, when they're all having forced to run it constantly, you could see it's several instances where one is doing it as a punishment and then the other men join or they're trying to support each other along the way. So that's another just fascinating synchronicity to me is that that's what that name means. That's kind of what happened when they were running that hill, that particular Easy Company group. It makes it a great name for the first episode of the show because it really kind of symbolizes the whole thing to me.
Oh,
That's super
absolutely.
interesting.
Absolutely. And the other thing about this show that they had was just they had all these sponsors too. So Chrysler and I'm not sure if it was Coca-Cola, but a couple of corporate sponsors that really added the marketing of this, and Currahee really did that. So one thing that I personally want to share is that my dad was stationed at both of the forts that they were at in Georgia at different times when I was a kid.
Interesting.
But my dad was a doctor, not a paratrooper. So I I remember Columbus, Georgia, and I remember like Fort Hood, but I don't remember the other one. My brother was born in Augusta when he was stationed there, and I remember some of that, but I don't remember the fort. So I mean, I could have maybe seen the hill when I was a kid. So interesting stuff.
Yeah, really interesting. Yeah, I wasn't born yet when my dad was in the paratroopers, so I don't know any bases. I know he did training in Panama, maybe because it was jungly and that was gonna be, where they would have been dropping into if he would have
Mhm.
actually made it to that, but yeah, interesting.
Yeah, another sad side note that I have about this is that 80s kid growing up with GI Joe, and so the funny thing about GI Joe that made it really cool is that the guy who did all the file cards was former military, so he put actual bases where they would have trained had they
Mm,
been in the paratroopers or in that particular field. And there are a couple of characters that were paratroopers that they had
okay.
the training at some of these places in Georgia, which is kind of cool.
Yeah, interesting. I like it.
Yep. Well, let's talk about a couple of the main characters here. We're going to go into details about a few, and then we'll mention some others that actually get some screen time here. The thing about this series, and you see this with a lot of HBO series in general, is that there's a huge cast, and so a
Mhm.
lot of these episodes will show you a sprinkling of them and focus on a few characters, and as we go along, they'll focus on one or two here, depending upon the episode. And we'll get to certain characters and a little bit more about them as we get to maybe an episode where they're more prominently featured. But the person that's most prominently featured in this one is the original CEO of Easy Company, Captain Sobel. And I thought David Schwimmer does a fantastic job portraying him.
Yes,
Um,
I agree.
I mean, I hate to say this, but if you know his character of Ross, some of that you can't help but kind of compare the two because you just Friends was such a big thing, and he was still doing Friends when he shot this. But you can see kind of the comparison a
Oh,
little bit with
really?
their personality in some ways.
I
Yeah.
actually never I'm not a Friends watcher. I've
Oh, you're not a
seen
Friends
it,
watcher.
I've seen, bits and pieces obviously here and there. It's not something you could avoid totally, but I
Mhm.
never actually watched, the episodes on a weekly basis. So I never had any of that. I know a lot of people see it and they go, "Oh, it's Ross, it's a little bit jarring," but I didn't have that because I never watched the show. So interesting that you say it's kind of, you can kind of see some of the same characters. I think the character to me is interesting. When he comes in, like your first introduction to him, right, is when they're at the very beginning, not the way the episode starts, but when you first get the flashback to the training scene, and he just walks in with such intensity, and he just starts being a jerk, like right off, like revoking passes, and you've got dust here and a wrinkle there, and finding, making up infractions and I think he's overly harsh, but I feel like, he that treatment of them really benefited them ultimately and probably how ended up helping a lot of them survive, right? Because when you jump in, you're gonna have to run in the dark. You're probably not gonna have water, food. Um, it's gonna be tough, and that whole experience, I think, actually benefited them even though the guy was just kind of an over the top jerk, at least he came off that way, and, one of the other things, though, about him was the incompetence, and I don't know if it's incompetence or just his like in the field, he would panic and he couldn't adapt, he couldn't problem solve in the moment on the spot when, when they're actually training like out in the field simulating actual missions. And I think that more than, him just being a total jerk, um, that was worse, right? That's what the men were like, no, we can't do it. We're not going to be able to follow him. And that was really his undoing was um and I'm not sure it was incompetence because I'm sure he was intelligent and he studied. I think it was his sort of level of panic and insecurity and just the inability to problem solve maybe is part of what was there too. But interesting character and the I think he loved the company. I mean the legit disappointment when he loses it is believable. So there's a
Yeah.
multiple facets to him, right? He's not just a one-sided villain. I think you can see other sides of him too.
Oh, absolutely. So, a couple things about Sobel real quick as we go through this. So first off, a lot of men did credit his training and his discipline that he built in them as credit for how well they were able to survive some of the places that they go. And
Mhm.
we're talking about some brutal conditions,
Yeah,
especially when we get to like episode 6 and 7, where we talk about Bastogne.
yeah.
Um, so they do credit him that.
Interesting. That's
The
good to
thing
hear.
that he got a dislike from the officers and the enlisted men was just how he would be so picky, and he started getting into their personal stuff, and that bothered
Mhm.
them. But also, the thing about him was that he was a control freak, and so, like you mentioned, in the field, when he didn't have control, he panicked. Number one,
Mhm.
and number two, he had a lousy sense of direction. So he just did not have that, and even the book it mentions that he always had, some aid that he would turn to and say, "Hey, where are we supposed to be on the map? Where are we here?"
Yeah.
And we're going to see some of that in the episode as well as we talk about it. But he just he he had this sense of control so much that if he didn't have control, he'd panic because he couldn't adjust.
Yeah, he couldn't improvise. He couldn't
Yeah.
just on the spot change. I go, "Okay, now the
Mhm.
situation's different. It's not my plan. Like, let's figure out what do we do?" He had no ability to do that.
Yeah. The thing we'll get into as we bring up the slides, a lot of the things that happened to him actually were in the book, which actually
Mhm.
happened, which we'll talk about some funny things coming up.
Yeah.
But I want to talk about, since we really only see him in this episode, and we see him in one or two episodes just kind of pop up. I want to talk about his life afterwards. So his life afterwards, he had some personal problems.
Mm.
Um, Ended up in the 70s trying to commit suicide,
Oh god.
and fortunately he failed in that endeavor, but it left him blind permanently. And
That's really
he was
sad.
in he was in a nursing home, blind in a nursing home, and the tragic tragedy of him being in that nursing home, and he died from malnourishment and other
Oh my
things
god.
in the nursing home in
Wow.
1987. And
That's
say what you want
horrible.
about the guy, say what you want about, you know, I don't know that anybody deserves all of that
No,
too.
no, no, definitely not. I mean, he's not, like I said, he's not really a villain. I think it does seem like he had personal problems, which drove a lot of that. And
Mhm.
um, yeah, I mean, that's horrible. I didn't know that he ended up like that. And I mean, that's really sad for that to happen to anyone.
Yeah, it's tragic, and you see him, and you see him as a villain here, and you see him portrayed kind of as a villain on here, and in the book, he's very much that. But you got to understand that movie villains are one thing, but real life people are completely different, and we all have
Right.
our complexities. We all have things that make us good and bad people at times. We all struggle. We all can
Yeah.
come across the wrong way at times, and that's life.
Yeah,
Um,
that's horrible. I mean, I didn't see him so much as a villain as, yeah, he's definitely the antagonist and
mhm,
he makes things difficult for all the guys in the company. And like, I mean, he has a lot of personality, a lot of character flaws, but he's not an evil person. That's the biggest thing. And he just can't, if he was your boss in just a company or a regular job and you'd go, "Oh, what a jerk, whatever." But the fact that he's incompetent in a battlefield where people's lives are in his hands, that was his fatal flaw there. And so but yeah, that's a terrible, sad ending for him, for
yeah,
anyone, for a veteran who wanted to serve his country to end up like that in a nursing home is very sad.
yeah, it's very sad, and unfortunately, he's not the only one that ended that way, and it's just ugh.
Mm,
We'll talk
that's
about some other
awful.
ones later on, but
Yeah,
another major character, and this is the prominent character throughout the series. He isn't a focus of every episode, but he's one of the major focus for this one is Dick Winters, who starts out as a first lieutenant at this point. He's played by Damian Lewis, who I thought did a fantastic job playing Major Winters. And the funny thing is and you'll find this out when you start looking into these actors that played in this. A lot of them are British and had to have
right.
an American accent,
Right.
which I thought was really
Interesting.
funny. Yeah,
Very interesting.
yep.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
I love the character of Winters. He just and you can kind of see the way he's portrayed, at least, why the men have so much faith in him. He's just a down to earth. He's a natural leader. You could tell he has so much integrity, and it's not like in an irritating, like I'm trying to be perfect way, but just a
Mhm,
very genuine. He's someone who's going to do the right thing, and he's very protective. You can tell of all the men under him.
mhm,
I mean, it's interesting when he's first introduced, um, there was it's a time in there, right, where the invasion gets postponed because of weather, and
mhm,
they're all just like it's such a letdown, right, because you'd have to have so much adrenaline going into that moment, and they're just kinda sitting there looking despondent, and they've all still got the camouflage on their faces that they haven't cleaned off, and Winters comes out and he's all cleaned up, clean shaven, totally put together, like he's already, switched into a different mode. And it kind of shows his character is just okay. I'm always put together. I'm not going to sit here and look let down and look dirty and not. He's just always put together and always on top of it. And I think you can see that right away. I think they did such a great job in this show with characters in a very short time through whatever it is, just looks or little actions showing who they were. Then you kinda understand it right away. They don't take a long time to talk about it, tell stories, tell you who they are. They just show it, and you can kind of see the character of the people pretty quickly.
Yeah, absolutely. And the other thing about it is that the real life Dick Winters was huge in getting this book out. He spent some time with Steve Ambrose, and he credits Steve Ambrose for changing his life because of this book and this series. And he tells a story. So you can find video of Dick Winters and him talking about Band of Brothers and talking
Mhm.
about his experiences over there. And he says with Steve Ambrose spent like a week with him and spent the night at his farm and his house. And so in sincerity and appreciation for never forgetting for what Ambrose did for him and bring to life the stories of him and his men, he has plaques at his house. He had plaques at his house that said Steve Ambrose was here, which I
Nice.
thought was kind of
That's
ironic.
a
I just
yeah,
heard
that's
that today
cool.
when I was watching one of the videos prepping for this a little bit. I just thought that was funny, a funny side note to this. Um, the other thing about him at this time is that these guys they entered the paratrooper because they could get more money. So
Mhm.
instead of the base pay of about $50, if they joined the paratroopers and joined the elite group, they got $100. And then these guys that had college education, officer training, they came in as officers. So this was a really big deal back then. You're looking at the best of the best. These guys had to fall in line and really adhere to certain physical conditions to
Yeah,
make it in paratroopers,
yeah.
and that was a big, huge deal. And one thing on Sobel, real quick, that it mentions in the book that it doesn't mention in the show is that he barely met the physical requirements, which
Of
was
course.
another thing that bothered the other men because
Yeah,
most of these men, especially in Company E, were like the best of the best.
yeah.
So we're not talking about just regular Joes. These guys are the best of the best, and some of the people that they have talked about in the book, they said that a couple of other guys from their hometown tried out and didn't quite make it. That they were almost suicidal because they couldn't make it because
Mhm.
this was the elite group.
Right.
So, for people like Major Winters, who will see him go up through the ranks right now. He's in this episode, second
Lieutenant,
lieutenant,
second
first
lieutenant
lieutenant.
gets promoted. Yeah.
Yeah, he gets promoted, and we'll see how he becomes commander and everything like that. And you just got to understand that physically fit men, these are the best of the best. And the other thing about him that you'll see in this book, and you'll understand, especially particularly the next episode that we talk about in a couple of weeks, is that he was well trained in the exact opposite of Sobel. Like he was very good at map reading and figuring out where you needed to be and leading guys into a battle. There's actually we'll talk about it more next week, but there's actually something that he does on D-Day that is still a technique that they're teaching at West Point today.
Yeah.
Um,
He was one too, and again, you see, like, the complete opposite of Sobel, where he could take a situation, immediately figure out, like, what's going on, okay, what do we need to do? Make the best of it, even though
mhm.
things have gone wrong, and he's, like, the complete opposite where he could think on his feet, and so I mean, that's another big contrast between the 2 of them, and yeah, it looks like I mean, just the physical requirements and the training was brutal, and just the weight that they have to carry. You'd have to be physically strong to carry all the pack and the equipment and everything that they're bringing with them to jump in.
Oh yeah,
Yeah, just trying to walk miles with that weight.
yeah. A couple of other characters that we'll mention that are featured prominently. Um, Major Winters had a best friend named Lewis Nixon, who's played by Robin Livingston, who you guys probably know primarily from Office Space as one of his major movies.
Office
But
Space.
yeah, he was a more well-known actor at the time. Uh, Lewis Nixon is best friends with Winters, and he was a Yale graduate, and so he moved up as an intelligence officer right away to the command position. So you had the company, you had like the command part of the company. So you had three companies in the unit, and then the command structure. And he moved right into that rather quickly, but he really kept in touch with Major Winters. And a couple other funny things about him is that he was a little bit of an alcoholic,
Mhm.
and Winters really didn't drink.
Yeah.
But the funny thing that he does, and we talk about it in this episode, Heather, do you know what he did?
Yeah, he hides his booze in Winter's footlocker. I thought that
Yes.
was brilliant when he's like, it's kind of apparent that he's an alcoholic early in the episode, and, Winters is like, "Well, what are you gonna do, when we go to war?" And he's like, "Oh, I hid a case of Bat 69 in your footlocker," and he thinks he's joking, but then he's like, "No, no, really." For someone who's so straight-laced, and that's kind of why I love the friendship between the 2 of them. When you first see Nixon, he comes out to join Winters when they're walking out of the movie, out of the tent. He's got his flask with him right away, and so you can identify him instantly as he's always got booze with him, and he's always smoking a cigarette. So it's booze, cigarette, and then you've got the straight-laced Winters. But I just love the friendship that develops between the 2 of them and the back and forth. And another thing that I think they make obvious without coming out and saying it, interesting you say he went to Yale. I think I wrote in my notes, like, "spoiled rich kid" with a question mark, and, well connected, because you could kinda tell right away, right, that he's given privileges that others don't have. He's promoted really quickly to battalion staff, where he seems like you're not gonna be in as much danger as if you're fighting. He does have to jump in with them, but
Mhm.
he's not gonna be in as much of harm's way as the rest, and, um, he's still a good guy, I mean, right? He's not like someone spoiled her, you're just like, "Oh god," insufferable. He's still a good guy, is a good friend, and, definitely still someone that you'd wanna be around, even though, you think he's maybe a little bit more privileged than a lot of the other guys that are there.
Yeah, and later on, as we get into some of these episodes, there's some scenes with him that are actually a lot of fun and funny, and a little bit serious too, that we'll talk about. But yeah, we want to mention his character because he features so prominently in a couple of scenes, especially with Winters. Another character that gets a little bit more screen time than some of the others is Bill Connery, who is a sergeant in the company, and he's one of the ones that is just a rough and tough kid from the streets of Philadelphia. His character is he's the tough guy of the group, and he's going to make others around him just as tough as he is. He's going to test their mettle. He's quick tempered. He's somebody that frankly he's the one you want on your side if there's a fight that breaks out, but you don't want to cross him on the other way because he'll snap real quick. But the significance of him in this, and the reason why we show this is we talk about him is that he had an older brother that was already over in Africa fighting, and so he was able to give some of the guys some perspective around the war. And then you find out a couple of days before they're getting ready to jump that his brother had passed away, and
Yeah,
so you had several of these men that did have family members that were in the war. Um, Ironically, Don Malarkey, who's one of the ones we may mention, he and another guy were friends with the actual person that Saving Private Ryan is based off of. It was actually based on a real life uh, paratrooper who lost all three of his brothers on
right,
D Day.
yeah,
And his mom got all three telegrams the same
that's
day.
yeah,
So, oh God,
that's
I can't
awful.
imagine that. But these are real men and there's real life. I know, Heather, we got a couple other men that we wanted to briefly mention. Who else did you want to mention beside, or did you want to talk about gonorrhea?
Yeah, yeah, gonorrhea. Garnier a little bit. I mean, I think in one scene, he's the guy who said he wanted brass knuckles when they're packing up their gear, but, so that was funny, but you see him a little bit in the early training scenes, but I always remember him as the one he's, like, chugging a beer, and he catches the jump wings in his teeth when
Mhm.
they're celebrating getting their jump wings, and, yeah, sad scene when he finds out his brother, died, but uh, 2 of the other characters that really stood out to me, um, are, actually, Lipton. It's Sergeant Lipton, who's played by Donnie Wahlberg, and, I think, like, he just does such an incredible, job at that role. I think that he's probably, is probably one of his best roles, as far as I'm concerned, and the
Oh, awesome.
character the character is another one of those. He's just a natural leader. He's so down to earth. He's always just kind of calm, collected, and you could tell he also really cares about the men there. I think when you first see him, he's just become a sergeant, right? When they're all standing at attention, when
Mhm.
Sobel's coming in criticizing everyone because he's saying the way he sewed on his bars was like incorrect or messy or he had thread or I don't know some kind of BS criticism, but yeah, Lipton throughout, he's one of the, kind of one of the prominent NCOs who's the leader of what they end up doing later in the episode, and, I think also when they talk about, "Should we tell Garnier that he lost his brother?" He's saying, "Well, I think you should be honest and tell him," and I think it's not about him, but he's just always just, "I wanna be straightforward and honest and just kinda tell it like it is," and I really loved his character, I thought it was great. Um, then also, George Luz, who's like the comic relief of it, right? And he does these great impressions of all the officers, of Sobel and, the major there in the unit, and, he it's just funny, it breaks it up because there's a lot of tense moments, a lot of stress, and, he's just he provides like a great comic relief to the episode. One of my favorites in the show.
Yeah, so two brief things about both those two guys. So first off, Lipton's one of my favorite characters, and we'll see him prominently in my favorite episode of this series is episode 7, The Breaking Point, which focuses on Lipton and Spears. My absolute favorite episode. So we'll talk a lot about them in that point. But you do get the real Carwood Lipton talking and telling us, and he's the one that reads the poem or the line from Shakespeare about Band of Brothers, the St. Crispin's Day speech. So the real live person, he got to meet him. Uh, Unfortunately, the real life Luz did not live to
Mm,
see this series, but his son played a major part in helping out with the series. The guys knew Junior, and he would come to the reunions. And if you look on YouTube, you'll find George Luz Jr. talking about Band of Brothers, talking about his dad, and he had really good friendships with some of these guys that knew his dad, and so they would tell him stories about his dad, and so that was one of the ways that the actors were able to really get a lot more from him. Another couple of characters who were interested that brought in. So Buck Compton joins the company later on when they're already in England. He developed a really good rapport with a lot of the men, and we'll see that through the series. One of the things that winners that we'll see here, and we'll talk about winners kind of choose him out for that.
mhm.
But the interesting thing about him that's mentioned in the book in this is that so the real Buck Compton became a judge and tried Sirhan, and we'll talk about that later on.
Really?
But he was also
Wow.
a baseball player and football player for UCLA, and he
Wow.
actually played in the Rose Bowl for UCLA and played baseball for UCLA. Now, I don't know if he crossed paths with Jackie Robinson during his years, but Jackie Robinson also played for UCLA
Hmm.
at some point in time with that, which I
Interesting.
found interesting. The other thing about it that doesn't get said in the series, but you find out in the book, and you'll find out if you look up anything about Buck Compton, is that he did not get along with Lewis Nixon. Lewis Nixon hated jocks because he just was so jealous of how they would easily get the girls in college. And so what he did was Lewis Nixon was assigned Buck Compton the physical training. Anytime there was physical training, he made Buck Compton carry that out.
Oh,
So
wow.
yeah, so
See,
Buck,
is that because, like, Nixon was kinda handed other things, right? Because he's kind of
yeah,
this privileged kid, and it's the one
mhm,
thing that he couldn't do, right? And yeah, so he's a little bit jealous there. Kinda
yeah,
funny.
he is, yeah. And
Funny.
so another
I like
character that
it.
gets introduced is just a couple other characters real quick. Um, Three other characters real fast. Just thinking off the Bull Randleman gets mentioned,
Mhm.
and
Love him.
he's one of the bigger guys. So one of the
Yep.
things that I watched is the actor that plays him's been in a couple of other things. I can't remember the actor's name off the top of my head, but um, he had thought that he passed away because he couldn't get a hold of him, and somebody had told him he had passed away. But he finally got a hold of him, And the real Bull Randleman really wasn't very talkative. He was like, yeah, uh-huh. But when he talked to his wife would tell him all kinds of stories.
How
And so he
funny.
built rapport with the actual guy's wife. And then eventually he got him to open up. And that's kind of an interesting story of how that
Funny.
happened. But something that doesn't get mentioned in this book was when they were doing some of their training in England, jumping from planes, practicing there. Um, Randleman was at the back of the plane and he got air sickness. And it's kind of gross, but if somebody gets sick, you know how you sometimes get sick. So it went all the way down the line. And so
Oh,
the first
no.
guy out was almost getting sick, and he was like, "Thank goodness they turned the green light on. It's my turn to jump, and I couldn't wait to get out and get out of that smell." And so all these guys, jumping out of the plane and getting the fresh air kind of cleared them of the air sickness. But it's just kind of a funny note on there. And then the two guys that kind of are involved with the Garnier, uh, you know, brother dying was uh, Sergeant Martin is
Mhm.
another one of the sergeants. He'll feature prominently in a couple of other areas, but his wife was the one that told him in a Dear Johnny letter, and so it's his letter that he gives to Garnier that
Yeah.
tells him that. And Frank Picani is another one of the troopers that is mentioned. He's prominent in a couple of other areas, but uh, Frank Percani was a consultant on this, the real life person. And one of the funny things that they said was that he was from the Chicago area, and like all his friends made him into a celebrity after Band of Brothers came out. And so
Wow.
it
Well,
was
that's
kind of funny,
cool.
you know, getting the real life guy some
Right.
actual credit. So.
Getting some recognition. That's cool.
Mhm. Yeah, it's cool. So let's go over kind of the episode. I don't know if you want to read or look at some of the summary or want to summarize it while I'm pulling up some of the slides.
Let's see. Hold on. Try to find it here. Okay, so the summary is in 1942, Easy Company jumped trains at Camp Toccoa under First Lieutenant Herbert Sobel, a strict disciplinarian who goes out of his way to find fault with his men. The company is shipped to England in September 1943, and as training progresses, Sobel's inadequacy as a leader in the field becomes evident. Now, Captain Sobel fabricates a dispute with Lieutenant Richard Dick Winters and gives him the option of accepting unwarranted punishment or a trial by court martial. Winters surprises Sobel by rejecting the punishment and chooses the court martial. These factors lead Easy's non commissioned officers to resign en masse. Colonel Robert Sink, the regiment's commander, reassigns Sobel to command a parachuting school for non infantry personnel. With new leadership, Easy Company prepares for Operation Overlord.
Mhm. Cool. And so it begins. This is the a few days before Operation Overlord, which we know as D-Day.
Yeah.
And this is them getting in line, getting ready for D-Day, and their new commander, who's not Winters at this point, and not Sobel, is
Yeah.
telling them that no jump tonight.
Yep.
So, and we
Yeah,
see something in here.
I love the way this starts, right? Where you're starting right on the verge of D-Day and they're right
Mhm.
about to jump. And it's just the the look of letdown on their faces, which it's like, okay, it's not disappointed, but I feel like you'd have so much adrenaline and anxiety and like, let's just kind of go at this point. That then the letdown of that we're not going and you've got all this gear on and your camouflage and just like, oh, now we're sitting around again. But yeah, you can really see it. It's so well acted. The look on all the actors' faces when he tells them that they're not going to jump right after this. But it's a great start, and then it's cool how it transitions then flashback into the training, how it all started.
Yeah, and a couple of the characters you may be able to recognize here. It's kind of hard with all the stuff on their face, but I think this looks like Webster, and that definitely looks like Percani right
Yeah.
there. So, and
Yep.
then so what happened was they got to watch films. So it's interesting. You'll see several scenes where they're watching films because sometimes that's what soldiers did. I mean,
Yeah,
the stuff that
sitting
happened
around.
on the TV show MASH was real in
Yeah.
downtime. So, and then there's,
Yeah, you could tell. I love this theater scene where you'd just be like, how could you even watch a movie at that point, right? I mean, you're jumping into enemy territory, into Europe that's never been done before. I mean, it would just be like, I don't know. I just can't imagine the level of adrenaline that you would have. A movie is just going to be like background. You're sitting there like deep in thought, which you could see on his face.
mhm. Yep. And then this is the scene you talked about with there's Winters and Nixon in their first scene here.
Yeah, I love this when they first come out together. Nixon's got his flask.
Yeah, he's got his plaques, and you'll notice Winters even has his gloves on. He's got his
Mhm.
rifle.
Yep, he's just
Uh,
totally put together, cleaned up already.
yeah, and then Nixon kind of has some of the stuff unbuttoned, and
Yeah, a little bit looser.
yeah, and this is where we get to the flashback scene. And so here's the flashback scene, Camp Toccoa.
Yep, here's Sobel. Uh-oh, you've got rust on your bayonet. It's dusty. What the heck are you doing?
Yeah, and then he's looking for trouble.
Yep, looking for yeah. It's like, are you killing the enemy with this? I don't think so.
Yeah, and then the malarkey, which is slang for
For
you know what.
bullshit, right?
Yeah,
Yeah, super
and
funny.
and he's like, "Yes, sir, yes, sir," which I think is.
Oh
And then
god.
there's that scene again. Sorry, I had two slides of the same thing, but um, he was always looking for infractions on them. And then here's the other thing that I want you guys to notice. If you look at some of these guys that are lined up, okay, so the big thing about paratroopers, and we're going to talk about it later on because there's another slide that shows it, was paratroopers were different from regular soldiers. And do you know one of the ways that you can tell the difference besides the jump wings?
Right.
Do you know the difference, Heather?
Sorry, say that again?
Paratroopers, how the paratroopers would dress versus regular
Oh,
soldiers?
right, with their boots. They have their pants tucked into their
Yeah.
boots versus
Yep.
just a straight leg. Yeah.
Yeah. So
Yep.
that was a big deal. And they make a big deal of it in the book with that. Yeah, the book, this really did happen. Sobel really did do this. And then here's the PT.
Yep.
There's Sergeant Martin.
Is
Uh,
that so? I mean, is that a practical reason, right? They have to tuck it into their boots so it doesn't get caught or
yeah, that's part of
something?
it.
Yeah.
But the other thing is the look. It's a much sleeker look. So because I mean, I know the army apparently you really get to shine your boots a whole lot and have to shine your boots. And straight legs don't show all the shine.
Yeah,
The other ones
right.
show the shine. So there's the PT, and
Yep.
here we go, running up Currahee.
Running up Currahee. This time they get to do it in their shorts and t-shirt, right? But then there's a lot of times, right, where they've got the full gear on and God, it's Georgia. I don't know the time of year. I guess they were there a long time, but it would be really hot trying
Oh
to do
yeah,
that. And no
absolutely.
water, like, right, they're not allowed to drink from their canteen. We get that scene and
Yeah, it's
it's
like
just
3 miles
brutal.
up, 3 miles down. Ooh.
And what he say? I mean, one guy I remember he's saying do it in 13 minutes or 15 minutes, which just seems impossible.
Oh yeah.
Like, I mean, I could walk, 1 mile in on a flat surface in in 13 minutes, but
Yeah.
uphill is just, oh god, it's brutal,
And
very
then
brutal.
apparently Sobel really did say "Hi ho, Silver." Um, so I guess he saw himself as a Lone Ranger there. Um,
Yeah,
yeah,
Sobel.
more the men running, and see there you go. There's Sobel.
I love too though how Winters in these runs, he's coming up to the men like, "Come on, you can do it. Just, push it a little bit further." He's like encouraging them. And Sobel's like, "That's not good enough. You're terrible. You'll never make," it's like they're completely different styles of being encouraging and trying to get him to do it versus you just suck. You'll never do it.
Yeah, and the scene in here where Randleman is a private, and he goes, "Why does Sobel hate us?" And he's like, "Captain Sobel does not hate Easy Company. He just hates you."
It's you. Like, yep.
So, but yeah, this is what you were talking about earlier. So this guy get disciplined, and what happens?
And they join him. Yeah, they all join him when they don't have to, which I
Mhm.
thought it showed that they're already kind of bonded together against Sobel
Yeah,
and with each other.
absolutely. And the other aspect about this and reading some of the book is that a lot of these men would do this on their personal time just because they knew they were training for war, and
Mhm.
they want to be able to be that extra level of physically fit.
Oh,
So,
yeah. This is
so
hilarious. I love this scene. The contraband, and the guy is like, he had 200 prophylactics in his locker, like, he won't have any energy to fight the war.
yes.
It's so funny.
All right. So
Oh
this
my
scene is
god.
described in the book, but it happens a little bit later, actually. So what happens is this is after while they're getting their jump wings. So this is
Okay.
after some they're running up and down. And so what happened was Sobel got injured in real life on a jump. So there's a day where the men were jumping and practicing their jumps, and he injured his foot, so he's off duty, and so he decided to inspect the men's barracks. Well, usually regulations they couldn't really touch their personal belongings
Mhm.
and look through the foot locker, but Sobel totally disregarded that. And so he goes in, and everything that he mentions in this is in the book.
Oh,
The
nice.
prophylactics, the condoms, the pornography, all of that. He's like contraband, contraband, cans of
Yeah.
peaches, cans of fruit cocktail. Um, so it just occurred later on than right here. But yes, this actually happened. And this incident here is what really drove the men nuts because it was the first time any of their personal
Yeah.
belongings got searched through, and they got berated for that. And it's one thing when it's a bayonet or an article of clothing on your uniform. It's something completely different when it's something that you have in your foot locker that's hidden beneath all your other clothing, and somebody went through it,
Well, the
with
guy's personal letters, right? He
yeah,
wrote
oh
letters
yeah,
home
letters
or to
letters were
girlfriend. I mean,
taken, yes.
taking someone's letters, that's getting, very
Yeah.
personal.
Yeah, I mean, it just was awful, and that he really did this, and that really made him mad. Um, so I just love that, and then I think this guy is his aide that they
Right.
they mention in the book, and he's kind of the lackey, and ironically, he's one of the sergeants as well. So um,
Right, yeah, the lackey is the one who has to keep telling him, what to do, right, when he screws up.
yeah,
It kinda depends on him.
yes, yep. All right, so we see this is a major thing where Winters becomes a first lieutenant here,
Yeah, and
and
this part, I mean, okay, I'm sorry, Sobel, when at is it the major or the colonel who tells the Colonel Sink maybe tells him, "You're gonna get I got these for, Winters, and he'd like to
mhm,
get it from you." And then Sobel's like, "Well, the colonel's seen fit to promote you," kinda like in a derogatory way, like, almost saying, "Well, I don't think you deserve it, but, the colonel's given you these." I mean, the way he presents this to him is like trying to be in the most condescending way he could possibly do it, which is, pretty lame.
and that was very real. So what happened was the Colonel Sink saw Winters training the men and leading them in calisthenics and some other stuff, and he made a comment to Sobel about how good of a leader Winters was, and that made Sobel nervous. That made him just totally not like Winters because he saw him as a rival. And
Right.
a rivalry here in this way, and this is what's going on is that you know he's putting the first lieutenant and making him basically his second in command of the
Mhm.
company right
Right.
here. And Sobel didn't like him, didn't want this to happen because of that.
Mhm.
And as we get into this, we're going to show a little bit more about what Sobel does. So there we go, and he's telling them, "Hey, you're going to be in charge of the mess, and I like spaghetti."
Right.
And
Uh,
so, what happens when they eat spaghetti, and then, oh, we're going to go run Currahee right after we've eaten some spaghetti, and so
oh
here's,
my god, the look on Winter's face when they're eating and
oh yeah,
Sobel just bursts in, right, interrupts the dinner, is like, "We're gonna run Currahee," and the look
yeah,
on Winter's face just says it all right there, just
oh
like,
yeah,
"Oh, this guy, like, it's just the lowest."
oh yeah. And so guys running on running up Currahee with all that.
Running and
Um,
puking.
yep. And then we get into kind of the jump school, and here's some
Mhm.
of the planes that they have.
I love these shots of the planes and the angles that they take, like the ones from the back, and they look low down, and I love how they change between these really broad shots where it's so cool that they got all these old planes too.
Mhm.
I don't know if they got old planes or they could make replicas, but it's
It
pretty
was a little
neat
bit
how
of
they
both.
found this, yeah.
Um, the ironic thing is that so the stripes on the planes, a lot of them you see, like for instance the first one there, the three stripes are not like perfectly done. Well, a lot of the planes in real life were not perfectly done because they had to get them ready for war and have it all done, and so they were haphazardly done. Well, the prop planes were done haphazardly the same way, and ironically, it was more realistic that way. So that was one of the interesting things that I read about the production that I thought was
Interesting.
fascinating. Yeah. So you have the jump school, and this is the jump school, and then they were in the line. And the interesting thing is, each of them had to check each other. So it went down the line, and 12 okay, 11 okay,
Right.
all the way up to the person that was in front. And then when the green light went on, you had to go. And it's not,
Interesting.
yeah, and it's not like these were, I mean, parachuting was not a well known or well done thing at this time. So you had chutes that, deployed and just opened up right away.
Right.
It wasn't like today where you just, Geronimo, when skydive for a little bit and you pull the cord. No, 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 no. These guys, chutes deployed, they're gone, they're out.
Yeah, I was gonna say it was interesting when they show him coming out of the plane, right? Because the strap hooks right on the plane, so it just
Mhm.
pulls the chute as
Yeah.
they jump out of the door. And
Mhm.
man, it seems like they're so close to the plane, right? When the chute opens, it's right by the plane, so they have no clearance, right? For they
Yeah.
don't fall, and then the chute opens. It looks kind of scary, like if the wind took them, it seems like because their chute's open, they could hit the plane. I mean, it looks really dangerous the way they do it, but
Oh yeah. So
yeah.
the other thing that it mentions in the book is when they come up to the doors, they had to grab on the outside. If they grabbed on the inside, that the jump master would like cut them out and make them go to the back of the line. And the reason why is that a man's more likely to go out the door if his hands are outside, and it also positioned
Uh,
them to get out of the plane a lot
and they
easier.
could push them, right? They wouldn't be able to brace
Hmm.
going
Yep.
this way, so what if you, kinda chicken out, someone could shove you.
Yep.
Yeah, and
Yep.
you could see Sobel, the look on Sobel's face when he's in the plane, he looks very scared. Like,
Oh, I
he
don't know if
doesn't
you
look.
but
Yeah, I don't think you have a shot of that one, but I just noticed, like, when he's sitting in the plane, he just kinda looks nervous, like, yeah, interesting. That I love that scene.
yeah. So they get their
Garnier,
wing.
right, they're celebrating getting their wings, and he just, like, chugs the beer and grabs the wings in his teeth.
Yeah,
Very
there's
cool.
Garnier. Yep. So they really did throw him a party after that, which I thought was kind of cool. And there's Luz right there, and there's Joe Toy, who we'll talk about a little bit later on. Um, and Luz was imitating Sobel.
Yeah, he's imitating someone, they're like, "You've got dust on your jump wings."
Please.
Yeah, that's funny. It's a great scene.
Yeah. And here we go. Here's the field, and here's what we're talking about. So they would do different. So what happened was they went to different forts and different places after jump school. They would go into a fort in Kentucky and another one in Georgia and all around kind of that area, and would train. And here's Sobel in the field, and you're seeing kind of the training. And if you've seen war movies where you see the preparation, you'll see the red bandanas, the yellow bandanas, and the book talks a little bit more about this in greater detail. But really, what we're getting in here is what you mentioned about Sobel not being able to
He can't
really
think
handle
on
it.
his feet, right?
Yeah.
He can't problem solve in the moment. So, he's just got an idea in his head, like, "Here's what we're gonna do," and then when he actually gets out there and he has to kinda think and manage it and come up with something, he gets so panicky and so antsy where he's like, "Nope, we just gotta go," and it's like, "No, no, we've got perfect cover here, like, let's just sit tight." He's like, "No, he's gotta go." He just doesn't have the right makeup to do this.
Yeah, and this particular mission right here that they're talking about now, it didn't go into this detail in the book, so a lot of this is for the TV show. But they were supposed to be in a position to surprise another group that was coming up, and instead, Sobel decides to attack them, and basically, you just got your men killed.
Yep, you're dead, and this is another spot where I just love all these actors because the looks on their faces, you could just read what's going through their mind, and, like, Lipton is here, and you could see the look on his face, kinda trading looks with all the men, just like, "Oh god, we're gonna have to follow this guy into battle," and it's just, a disaster.
Yeah, and the look on Winter's face right
Yep.
here.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Just looking at him like, oh god, this guy."
Yep. And then after jump school, another lieutenant joins, Welsh,
Mhm.
and he's another good guy that we'll talk about later on. But here's him, and basically they're giving him the laydown on Sobel that he's no tactician, right? Right.
Nope, nope.
So, and then the men board the train, and then they get on board the ship. Now, the book tells you a little bit more about the ship. Basically, it's a steamliner that was only built for 1,000 people, and they had 5,000 men on the ship.
Wow, I mean,
Um,
it looks super
so,
crowded.
so it's like 2 men per bunk. So they would trade off. One guy would sleep there, and the other one would sleep like on the deck.
Mm,
And they said some
wow.
funny things about Sobel on that ship that he tried to get them in, get space to do calisthenics, and that there just wasn't space to do it.
Yeah,
So,
no, wow. Well, the shot actually, like, leading up to this, when they get on the ship, I thought was amazing. Like, if you
mhm,
watch the show, the view of them all coming onto the ship and you see they're in Brooklyn, right? And you see all the Manhattan skyline in the
mhm,
background of the ship when they're getting on, and it looks really like a 1940s era kind of filming. It's grayish and it's really grainy. It looks so cool. And then as they're coming out of the harbor, you see the Statue of Liberty, and all the
mhm,
men are just, standing outside on the edges of the ship, and they're all
mhm,
looking at the Statue of Liberty. I thought that was such a cool shot. You think of like all these men, they're probably like right from small towns and farms, and most
mhm.
of them have probably never traveled, and so they're seeing this for the first time as they're leaving, to go off to war. It just, I just that seeing that just really hit me as just an emotional moment seeing that. And then on this ship too, you get um kind of a little argument breaks out, right, between Liebgott and Garnier, right,
Mhm,
about well, Sobel's Jewish and he's like, well, so am I. But I thought it was interesting, right, that you have all these men, they're Americans, right, but they come from all these different backgrounds. They're Italian, Irish, Polish, some are Catholic, some are Jewish, and they're all here united as Americans going to fight in Europe, which has basically just had nonstop wars over different ethnicities, different religions, and just kind of the juxtaposition of that just kind of struck me seeing this. I thought that was a pretty interesting thing.
yeah, it's interesting and ironic in a couple of different ways. So first off, they call him a son of Abraham, but the reality is that we're all sons of Abraham,
Yeah,
uh, which is kind of funny.
it's different.
Um, but and I'm not going to go off on a religious tangent. There's stuff there, but the other aspect about this, and I'm going to burst some bubbles. I don't know if you knew this. All right, and I'll get into this later on when you focus on Liebgott a little bit, but Liebgott was not actually Jewish.
Really?
No, all the guys in the group thought he was, but it was confirmed because he they lost touch with him, and he died later on. And the information about him from this show about what happened to him is not entirely accurate. But he was actually Roman Catholic, and
Oh,
his family
wow.
came from Germany. And
Right.
the main thing was they hated the fact that they were giving Germans a bad name with that. But yeah, he
Mhm.
wasn't actually Jewish, which is kind of interesting.
Interesting.
Yeah,
Yeah, because he was German speaking, and so, right, I
yeah,
figured he was a German Jew, but,
yeah.
it may have been easier for him to get by as that, right? Even
Oh
to
yeah.
or to allow that to be thought, right? Because a lot of Germans went back to fight for Germany, and,
Hmm.
I'm sure if people just kinda thought he was was Jewish, then that may have been easier for him.
Yep, exactly. And that was what was alluded to by his kids and other people that came forward that are related to him. And then the other aspect about this is guys are playing cards and stuff, and you see
Yeah.
how tight the quarters are on there. And I thought that was funny. The one like fighting over Sobel. Yeah,
Yeah, just, like, waste of time.
yeah, yeah. And so once they got into England, they had training on all kinds of different weapons. They had to do different fields training. They had to do different map and compass training, which was interesting. You see some of that right here, and you see some of the guns on the wall that
Mhm.
they were learning to use. Um, and here we come to the famous scene. Winters, they're out on a mission. Winters has led his men on a trip in position. They're waiting for Sobel, and
It's
what's
like,
happening here?
Who put this fence here?" It's so funny. He's like, "Oh, you're like a whole grid officer. This is, you're in the wrong spot." And oh my God, when Lutz just starts, they're like, "Oh, pretend you're Major Horton." It's so funny. He's like, "You get this company on the move," and like that dog just ain't gonna hunt. It just cracks me up, like the way the verbiage he uses, and Sobel is just like, "What? Major Horton? He's here? Oh my god," and of course Winters, right, he's expecting Sobel to be there, he's not, and he's immediately like, "Okay, improvise. You go here, you do this," and is right on top of it. But this scene is just hilarious, and all these guys, like, laughing, and even the guy up by the fence with Sobel gets it. He's like, "Oh, I think it's Major Horton, sir." This guy's impersonation is just brilliant. It's so funny. Like, "You cut that goddamn fence, get this company on the move."
All right, so a couple things. So first off, Sobel really did have a jacket like this. He when he got to England, he was able to buy it off of one of the flyers. So he really would wear a jacket like this out in the field for them, which is just unusual for those guys, especially with the furry things
Mhm.
right there. So
Yeah, yeah.
that made it even more ridiculous. But apparently, according to the book, this incident really did happen. And
Wow.
so the interesting thing about it was they cut the fence, and Sobel kind of got in trouble for it. And he said that Major Horton was actually in London. He was away from it. And Sobel got so mad about it, but he could never find out who did it because nobody would say anything. So he never did find out who did this. And,
Oh god, it's so
and
funny, yeah, when they come back and I don't know if it's the colonel is like, "Who's the idiot who cut that man's fence?" It's like,
yes,
"Major Horton told me to do it." It was so funny.
yeah,
Oh, and when the old English guy comes, and he's like, "Oh, you captured me, Yanks," and he
yeah,
comes again, "Hi ho, Silver," and like, "Is that the enemy?" "Yeah, yeah, pretty much."
yeah, yeah. So he cuts the fence, and they're marching down the road here.
Yeah, this is great.
Yeah. All right. So then we see
Winters.
we see part of this, and so I don't know if I got all the pictures for the court martial, but so Sobel's a complete jerk at this point, and I don't know why he did this to Winters, but he basically has him. It's described better in the book. He's got to inspect the latrine at 1000, and it's right before one of the generals is coming through, and so Sobel apparently changes the time and says he phoned and he sent a runner to Winters, and Winters came in and inspected the latrine at 1000, Even talked to the guy who made the clean it and saw that he did a good job and everything was fine. But Sobel is insisting that he told Winters he changed the order to 15 minutes prior to that, and that's what kind of led with this whole thing. And so Winters was stationed with a family that didn't have a phone, and there was no runner that met him. And Winters did his job as he was originally ordered. Sobel's just being a dick, and Sobel just is trying to show that he's still in charge. And so he gives him an ultimatum to where he takes the no pass to where he can't go off base for a weekend, and he basically stays on base anyway. But he decides on court martial, and they don't know exactly what to do with this because it's just very insignificant. So
Right.
Winters gets reassigned here to the mess hall and the mess hall group, and it's described in the book as like one of the remedial things because a mess officer at this point where they are, it's the lowest of lowest jobs, and so you see him as a mess officer here.
Right. Well,
Uh,
to me, that whole thing was like, Sobel made an ass of himself with the whole fence cutting, and he looks really bad. And people all think Winters is like this great leader. He has all this potential, right? And so he's like, well, detract attention away from me. I'm going to concoct this whole thing to make Winters look bad, like he's not doing his job, right? And it's kind of like blame shifting, or I'll tear him down, and then it's going to detract from me looking like a complete idiot. But he picked the wrong guy to do this right? I mean, first of all, it's just nonsense, like, who court-martials someone over some nonsense like that? And then second, like, Winters has, like, the utmost integrity that I think was obvious. He would never, like, if he didn't do something or made a mistake, he's the type of person who would own right up to it, and I think everyone could kinda see that in his character. So when you're trying to pull this with him, it just doesn't work, and I think Winters knows, like, "Nah, I can go to trial because this is BS," and he calls his bluff, and, you know, Sobel gets kinda burned in the end with it. It's pretty interesting.
yeah, absolutely. And the other aspect about this is that um, Major Winters, if you go watch any of his footage, he talks about this, and he actually still has the documents.
Oh, wow. Interesting.
Yeah, he still had the
Yeah.
documents in real life.
I think
So,
Sobel was shocked, right, that he decides to go to,
mhm.
trial by court martial because he thinks, "Oh, he'll just take the punishment," and, Sobel Winters is finally just like, "Nope, I'm right on this, right? I didn't do anything wrong, and so let's see. I'll call your bluff, and we'll see how it goes." And yeah, you can see like the senior leadership has got to be, going, what's Sobel thinking? It makes him look so bad to do something like this when they're on the eve of this huge invasion. And now you're going to mess around with the court martial of an officer who's, really good and is going to, is a great leader who you need for this.
Yep. And so Winters is away from the company, and the sergeants get together. Do you
All
want to
right.
describe what's going on here?
Yeah, so here all the NCOs get together, and this is Lipton here figures prominently in here, and Garnier. They're kind of the main two, and they're all saying, you know what, Winters is out. We are not going to follow Sobel into battle. He's going to get us all killed. If we're going to get killed, we might as well just be shot, in a firing squad, because they're basically saying, look, these are the consequences. If we resign, we're going to go resign our commission. If we do, we could potentially be shot. And Garnier says, you know what? I might as well because I'm not following Sobel into battle. He's going to get us all killed anyway. And so they take a stand to support Winters, which I think, just the fact that they are going to war, it allowed them to kind of get away with something that they normally wouldn't. But it's a pretty ballsy move by them, and really shows how much they thought of Winters and how much they hated Sobel. Pretty
Yeah.
interesting.
And this did happen in real life. And I mean, they seriously, because of time of war, they could have all been shot.
Yeah.
So the thing about it in the book that tells about it is that Winters kind of knew about this, and he kind of advised them not to do it, but they went through it anyway. And what happened was one of the guys got busted down to private, and another one got kicked out of the paratrooper unit. And apparently, Sink and some others had probably gotten wind of this prior to it officially happening, because they knew kind of what was going on. But there was nothing they could, that they were prepared to do, because they were trying to, we didn't know when D-Day was going to occur at that point.
Right, and so do they like, we have to have some consequences, right? So we're gonna bust this
Mhm.
one guy down to private, we'll get rid of the other as a way to say, "You're the
Mhm.
kind of the ringleaders, we're punishing you, and the rest we need to keep." It's just as a way to kinda say, we didn't let it go off scot-free, right? They had to do something.
Yeah. Yeah. There's Martin and Sergeant Grant.
Mhm.
And then there's Lipton and there's Garnier right there. So yeah, they did that. And so basically, the other consequences of that is that he brought over, so Sink brought another commander from Baker Company to take over Easy Company. He brought Winters back into Easy Company. He sent Sobel to a paratrooper school, which trained medics and doctors and other people that were jumping in after everybody after the post invasion. So he's like, I can't think of another person that would be better for that kind of training. So that was kind of cool.
So,
And so
yeah, kind of promoted out of
yeah,
of a place where he could do any damage. Like, let's kinda
yeah.
make it look like a promotion, and it's definitely a lot of disappointment. I did love that scene right there, the shot of him saluting where all the NCOs come out of that meeting and they all salute him.
Mhm.
And then he salutes Sobel, and Sobel is just so petty, he just doesn't even acknowledge it, right? They just drive by in the Jeep.
Yep. And we will see that play out later on when we get to the last episode. So, but yeah, here's where they run into other guys that were have already been in combat, some British troops, uh, and they get a Luger, and that's kind of cool. And then
Yeah.
we're introduced to another Buck Compton, who joins the group here, and this is where Winters kind of gives him the rundown. Do you want to talk about this scene? Do you know anything about this scene, Heather?
Yeah, so, Winters is talking to Compton. He's coming in and he's been bonding with the men by like I think shooting craps with them or gambling, playing cards, and um, Compton kind of Winters is chastising him for that, and Compton says, "Hey, are you jealous that the men are getting close to me that we're bonding?" And Winters is like, "No, um, what if you'd won? What if you'd won the money?" And then he tells him, "Don't ever put yourself in a position to take anything from these men." And I think it shows a lot about Winter's character too, not just Compton's, right? Because Winters is concerned always for his men and that you're in a higher officer position, don't take anything from them. And Buck is a little more casual. He's just trying to play cards and make friends and just a different approach to it than what Winters would take, but both interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. And then there's Sergeant Martin, who gets the letter, or well, no, that's Joe Toy. So that's
The
Joe
toy,
Toy,
yeah.
who we'll talk about later on. There's Sergeant Martin getting the letter, and there's Lipton right there. And Martin gets the letter from his wife about Garnier's wife, or Garnier's brother. Sorry, his wife.
Yeah, his brother.
John
I thought
Martin's wife, Garnier.
Garnier's reaction was interesting, right? Because when he's in the theater and he first reads the letter, he looks really upset. Like you could tell his first reaction, but once he's out talking to Martin and he kind of says, "Well, I feel bad for my mom." Like he's trying to it feels like just not kind of numb it out or not think about it.
Hmm. Yeah, I think he kind of accepts it, but at the same time, it's one of those things where you're going to see this guy's he's always got to be tough,
Yeah.
and so people like that are tough on the exterior, they hold everything in, and so in the next episode, we'll see what happens when he kind of lets that out, um, which is real interesting. What happens, and we'll talk about the next time on that. But so here's them as they were preparing for D-Day. and getting ready to jump. And then here's the actual day of days where they start to jump and
This
they can.
this was amazing right here, how heavy all their stuff was, like, they're when they're trying to get into the plane and you see them like, they're struggling and guys are, like, pushing them from the back and someone's pulling them in. It just I can't imagine. You're thinking you're jumping out of a plane and you've got all this weight and all this gear strapped to you. It's, like, so much that it's hard to get up steps into the plane.
Yeah, and the commander would have to help them up
Yeah,
so that they'd line up and they'd be lying down and he'd help them up on there. And the other big thing about this was they learned about a leg bag, which they'd never used in training. And so they would stuff all kinds of other stuff in their leg bag. And the problem with the leg bag was when they actually jumped, and we'll talk about this more in the next episode,
yeah.
all of it was gone.
Well, yeah, it's like, what do you think? They have all this, but they're gonna have to like run and fight and move. And so, how are they can't even get up on their own. How do they
Yeah.
expect, like, once they jump in, they're gonna carry all this stuff? Like, yeah, it's interesting how that evolves over time to where they're like, nope, carry your weapon, ready to go, and that's it. You don't jump with all this stuff. All right.
I didn't get a shot of this, but I love the Luz. He imitates saying tonight, tonight.
Yeah, I was gonna say too, right, he starts out imitating Sync, and then he kinda transit once he realizes what the announcement is, he transitions back into his normal voice, and you could kinda see, like, "Oh, shit, we're really going now," right? And it
Yeah.
kinda just it tells you the gravity of that moment where he's starting out funny, and then he's like, "Oh god, this is serious," right? Yeah, it's interesting. But I loved actually the shots, like, after this, where they're behind the planes and they're all taken off, and then they
Oh
show
yeah.
this whole line of them in the sunset going, and
Mhm,
then you switch to all the men's faces on the
mhm.
airplane as they're, like, thinking, like, you can imagine what thoughts are going through your head when you're just about to jump into war for the first time. And then they focus on Winners, he looks out the door, and then you see the whole view, there's, like, all these planes and all these ships crossing the channel, and you just kinda then get the scope of this massive invasion that's been planned for, like, 2 years, and
Mhm.
now it's all finally coming, it's on the verge, and it's, like, right there, like, I can it's so hard for me to watch 1 episode of this series because right there, I'm like, "Okay, immediately start
Oh
the
yeah,
next,"
you want to go to
right?
you want to binge it.
Yeah, yep, you wanna binge this series, it's just so good, it's hard to stop.
Yeah. The other thing that I didn't get any pictures of, I wish I could have. These are hard to find on the web, folks. So I hope you appreciate them because they took forever to find. But there was a point when they were training with the new CO and Winners, and he's in a tent and gets Winners into his tent, and he's like, and Winners like, I had a compass, and so they didn't know where they were going to go, but Winners had a compass, and they were able to trace based upon how many miles they jumped on their compass and how far the walk was back,
Yep.
and practicing for all that they had to do. They kind of figured it out, and they have a map in there and say, "Oh, it's Normandy." So I thought,
Yeah, that was cool. It was Winners, right, when they were in the tent, and they're measuring, and then so, yeah, he gets out his compass, like, "Okay, we went this far this far this way," and they figure it out. There was
mhm,
another spot where they did that, it was actually Nixon, right, when they're on the train and they had no idea where they were going, and, he comes up to Winners, right, and he says he's figured out based on what they're
mhm,
doing that they're gonna invade Europe because up until then, you'd had the war in Japan, we hadn't invaded Europe, and, yeah, he's like, "We're invading Europe," it's a big he'd figured it out. So I thought those moments were really cool,
yeah,
when they try to figure out what they were doing. And then just there were moments where I thought they really delivered, information, like, really cleverly, like, without kinda having to do a long disposition, like, where they'd show them training, they'd show, like, Omaha Beach, Utah, the operations, how it was gonna work, or just different things about the jump, like, when Colonel Sink, I think it is, comes in when they're celebrating getting their wings, he comes in and says, "Well, this has never been done before. It's the first time we use paratroopers." So you get these little bits of information kind of just as you go through it, rather than a big kind of exposition piece. I thought it was really well done how they did that.
Yeah, and I like so Winters is next to Welsh, and when Nixon comes up to him and he's like he tells him about the thing and he offers him a drink and Winters is like, you know I don't drink, you know, and
Right.
like, if I thought you'd take it, I wouldn't offer it to you. And then he gives it to Welsh and Welsh is like,
Right.
yeah, heck with this, I'm gonna drink, which I
Yeah,
thought
it's
was
funny.
hilarious.
It's
So
funny, it's great. So many great moments in this.
yes, so many great ones, and you really get a feel for the characters. There's the after in the jump wings, I couldn't get find a shot of this, but Percani's showing his boots off to Martin, and it's really showing them that hey, once they get their wings, they can tuck in their boots, and that was a huge deal.
Mhm.
So
Yeah,
yeah.
interesting. So many interesting little tidbits about the paratroopers and the history of it and how it
Oh yeah.
works and the invasion. Yeah, really good. Great stuff.
Yeah. So the next episode we'll get into more of D-Day, and I don't know if we'll have as long of a discussion on it because we really had to set the background for this first one. But the next one
Mhm.
we'll get in the invasion D-Day, and we'll get into Burkhart Manor, which is the coolest thing. I, for one, can't wait to see this in real life. So I get to go see the base that they were trained in England at.
So
Get to
awesome.
see that, and
So cool.
then I can't wait to see Normandy and Utah Beach and the landing zones, everything on there. It's going to be awesome. I've heard all kinds of stories about how real and gosh how scary it was for them
Oh,
to the beach.
can't
So
imagine. Can't
yeah,
even imagine. I mean, it's as scary as the paratrooper would be. It would be even worse, like coming up on the shore, right when they're I mean, that was just like it's brutal. It's
oh
just
my gosh, and just that first scene of Saving Private Ryan is just
mm,
it's so difficult to watch
it's
because
just
it's so
awful.
realistic and my goodness, but that's the realism they were going for that scene of Saving Private Ryan. It matches what how they filmed and what they did in this. I mean,
Yeah, it does. It puts it all together, right? Because you know they're going to drop in to take out those units to clear the way for them. It's so
mhm,
interesting.
yeah, it's very cool. So, all right. Well, as we end the stream, was there anything? I know you're a wrench on several channels. If you want to plug any of those, and I'll plug away some of my stuff.
Well, yeah, but I mean, I'm actively a wrench on Doomcock's channel. I'm there for Pop Culture Breakdown. There every Wednesday night, and also on Friday Night Frolics. I'll be in the chat for both of those. So always hope to see everybody there. I think I'm an honorary wrench on Stark's channel, Stark of Iron, and on Sean Carter's channel. But I don't actually do any work, so I just it's kind of honorary position. But love those guys too. Check those out whenever they stream.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. And speaking of Stark, so next week, stay tuned to this channel because we're going over the top 40 of 1980. Next week,
Yes.
third week of January is already
Oh
coming.
God, already. Can't believe it.
So that's a fun list. It'll be interesting. I'll send out the info to you. Heather's one of my panelists, but also Agent Pepsi One and Stark of Iron himself will be on here. We will get to see how many of these songs Agent Pepsi One wants to bash. Uh, I think she likes
Yeah,
the early '80s better, but I mean,
I hope
wow, we're
so.
getting the transition from disco to synth pop right here in 1980. So stay tuned for that. And then I will get it out this week. Flash Gordon, I'm putting together slides for it, so I will have a video on the 1980 Flash Gordon movie. So this is like 1980 week on Rob Wright Chen's Pop Culture. So that's coming up, and then
Nice.
um, also going to be on Doomcock's channel, Pop Culture Breakdown on Wednesday. This Wednesday, as we're filming, it's already been announced by Fet for Hire, so I can tell them the movie of the week is Pulp Fiction. So
Good stuff.
please come and check us out. Check me out on that channel as well as this. But thank you so much, chat, for being here. Thank you for watching this. And if you're watching on replay, thank you for watching this. Please feel free to leave comments below on your thoughts on Band of Brothers, what you loved about the series, what you like about this episode. If you know any facts that we didn't cover, please share those. I always want to hear more about these wonderful men in this wonderful series. But that's about all I've got. And
Uh, Herc 130 in the chat says wrenches get paid so much money they never have to work again. God dang it. We're supposed to get paid for this?
Jim
Ah,
Cook didn't pay you?
I know. What's going on? I need to retire. Uh,
True.
that's
True, true,
fun.
true.
Yeah.
But anyway, thank you so much, folks. We're gonna end the stream. Thank you so much. Stay tuned for some other things come up on my channel that I mentioned, and we'll see you on the next one.
All right. Thank you guys. Bye.
Bye.